And now, it's The Law Show on CISL 650. A comprehensive look at everything you need to know about the law. Now, here's Stirling Faux.
Good morning and welcome to The Law Show here on CISL 650. Very much looking forward to this hour as we have new guests in studio with us. Our guests are the principals from Maynard Kischer Stojicevic in Vancouver, Gordon Maynard, Rudy Kischer, and Alex Stojicevic, all in studio. We'll start with you, Alex, with the most difficult to pronounce name. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Sterling. Thank you for having us.
It's good to have you. Rudy, welcome.
Thank you very much.
And Gordon, to you. Welcome as well.
Thank you, Sterling.
Immigration law. Gordon, your partners were telling me moments ago that there was a time back a dozen or more years ago when you were the recipient of the prestigious Louis Saint Laurent Award for having basically committed the entire Immigration Act to memory and for doing a whole lot of work on the National Committee of the Canadian Bar Association. So belated congratulations. You brought the 2015. Now it's not the Immigration Act anymore. It's the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act with you. I assume this kicks in a couple of weeks.
The 215 Act is simply a consolidation of the Act as it appears right now. So the 2002 Act has been carrying on. This book gets republished every year just to pick up all the changes.
Okay, so is immigration law in Canada so, Rudy, so in such a state of change and flux that these annual updates are absolutely mandatory?
Oh, they're absolutely mandatory, and they're not even adequate because the law is changing almost, I would say, every 6 weeks we get a major announcement that causes us to sort of call clients and say, guess what, we thought you were going to be able to qualify, you don't now. Or call somebody back and say, listen, you didn't have an opportunity before, but there's new opportunities coming.
This book may be out of date by March.
Oh, really? There's just that much change going on. Well, there's a lot to talk about. But, Alex, talk to us a little bit about MKS. Talk to us a little bit about your firm. How long have you been around? And have you always been in Vancouver?
Yes, we've always been in Vancouver as a firm. We started, Gordon Maynard and I started at first as Maynard and Stojicevic in November of 2002. Gordon and I worked at another law firm together prior to that for about 7 years. And then almost 10 years ago, Rudy joined us, and we became Maynard Kischer Stojicevic.
Okay. And you and Rudy went to school together.
Yes, we did. We went to law school together. That's right.
That's ancient history now, though.
Well, okay. So about 10, 12 years the firm has been around. And why immigration law? I'll go to you first. Why? I mean, when you come out of law school, and you and Rudy went together, so I'm sure you had a beer over the years and talked about where you might like to end up. Why did you end up in immigration? Why that choice, Alex?
Well, look, I didn't make a choice, to be perfectly honest about immigration law, to get into it. I made a choice to stay in it. I articled here in Richmond at the law firm of Pryke, Lambert, Leithley, Russell, which is a wonderful law firm with great people. And an opportunity arose during the time that I was there to join the firm as an associate where Gordon was working.
Okay. And
they did only immigration law, and I took that opportunity, and that at the time was a bit of a challenge. I had no real expectation of sort of what to expect in immigration law. But I enjoyed it immensely, and I've stayed in it ever since. The stories that you hear from people coming from all over the world and telling you all kinds of incredible things is what keeps me coming to work every single day. I mean, I'm in a very privileged position to be able to do that. At the same time, you also get the benefit of your employer clients and your institutional clients who have different needs and who tell you different narratives all the time. And so I get the benefit of hearing that from both sides all the time, and that's what's kept me in immigration law.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Rudy? What was the reason behind your choosing this particular field?
Well, I went into law, I think, as many lawyers do, because they see an opportunity that they'd be able to help people.
Right. Okay.
And so that was sort of pushed me to going into law. But I come from my background. Both my parents were immigrants. I come from a mix, I think, that you could only find in Toronto. My father was from Transylvania, and my mother's from Jamaica.
Oh my!
So and I thought that was normal growing up because my father had several friends with that mix, and so I thought Jamaican was a sort of a typical sort of mix, and I didn't realize how I got older that was unusual. And so our dinner table would consist of, Wiener Schnitzel for dinner and then mangoes for dessert.
Okay.
And, now that I'm in this field, I realize, that number one, that's not a typical Canadian experience, but number two, that, I can relate to a lot of my clients who are coming to a new culture and moving to Canada with their families.
Interesting stuff. And Gordon, you appear to have made a tremendous commitment to immigration law. When did that start?
I started off as a school teacher.
Really?
Yeah, taught school for 8 years in Vancouver. Then I went to law school. And I wanted to get into law because, like teaching, I thought they were people-oriented. Wanted to help people.
Okay.
I got into law with a business firm downtown. Lots of chrome and glass corporate clients.
Okay.
Worked there for 2 years. Did not like it. Was not happy.
Pretty impersonal environment, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Well, not as human as I wanted it to be.
Okay, fair enough.
I ended up working for a friend of mine, and he happened to have inherited a small immigration practice. And that got me into working with immigration clients. That made me happier, and that's where I stayed. Ended up working with Dennis McRae, who ran an immigration firm. That's where I met Alex. We worked there for several years, and then started our own firm. And just stayed in immigration law. Now it's nearly 25 years for me.
Interesting stuff. Now, as a Pacific gateway to our country, is Vancouver the busiest city in Canada for those in the immigration business, be it from the legal end or the processing end?
No, it's busier in the center of the universe.
Really?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm confused, though. Do you mean Calgary or Toronto?
Oh, wow, that got Rudy going.
Or Montreal.
Toronto guy. Well, you said Montreal. And let me, because one thing that I hope to do with three of you in the room over the next hour is, debunk more than a few myths and perhaps straighten out some of the confusion, alleviate some of the misconceptions that so plague the immigration file in Canada. And I think Quebec is one of the big confusers right from the get-go, because we have 9 provinces and 3 territories doing one thing, and we have the province of Quebec out there doing whatever it is they do. So that confuses things because it's not universal, coast to coast to coast. So what does Quebec do, Alex, that the rest of us don't do, and is it working?
Well, I would argue that to some extent it definitely is working for them, for Quebec. Quebec signed a comprehensive agreement with the federal government, which gave the selection decision to no small part to them on immigration. So in the immigration file, which a lot of people don't really appreciate, constitutionally is a joint federal-provincial jurisdiction area.
Right.
The province of Quebec has always had, well, not always, but in recent memory, since they signed an agreement with the feds, have taken a strong hand in terms of their own selection. So, and their selection has, in some ways, been prophetic for the rest of us. They were the first, for example, to look at younger aged immigrants as being critical, because Quebec has an aging population, much like we do in British Columbia and everywhere else. So, from that extent, that was a useful tool for everyone to look at, was looking at their program. Plus, they had a focus on French language. Immigrants from francophone countries.
Right.
So those elements were probably useful for them. When the current government came into power, they looked at that model and that model of provincial selection, and really a lot of other provinces have now jumped into it. I mean, Manitoba, for example, per capita probably chooses far more immigrants than Quebec does. I mean, Manitoba's provincial nominee program, for example, is Manitoba's immigration. They choose close to 9,000 or 10,000 applicants a year directly, and the federal government has basically outsourced the selection to them in that regard.
And so did they?
We do the same.
Do they rubber stamp those 9,000 applications in Manitoba for all intents and purposes?
Not entirely. The way the system is set up, the federal government retains a role of doing security and background checks, what we refer to as admissibility issues.
Okay, sure.
They do that.
Yep.
But the province does the selection. So as soon as as long as the person is admissible, they don't have serious health problems, they don't have a criminal record, that can't be rectified in some way, they don't pose a security threat, then it isn't effectively afterwards a clearance, or I don't want to use a rubber stamp, that's probably not appropriate, but whatever the province chooses would then get selected.
The approval is pretty forthcoming.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Rudy, when we look at immigration issues and matters across the country, most of us, you would agree, most Canadians are confused about immigration. We don't understand a lot of it. And Gordon was saying moments ago that this brand new 2015 edition of the Immigration Act, and I know it has a different name now, will probably be redundant in March. It's going to need an update in March. So the changes are coming so quickly. It's tough for the layperson to keep up with them. How difficult is it for a person who wants to come to Canada to keep up with all of this stuff?
I think it's very difficult. I mean, I think there was a time when people could apply on their own without professional assistance. I think that time's gone. I think really right now you're looking at, there are so many requirements along the way. If you look at this express entry system, which is coming into effect in January, it's actually a two-stage process that requires a bunch of approvals up front. And because of that, you've got a whole bunch of applications you've got to make that you've got to pay for, that the risk in somebody applying on their own is now far greater than it ever has been. And the chance of a change coming along while they're in that process is far greater than it's ever been.
Right.
Not to mention that one of the big components in the 2002 Act came out was enforcement, and many more areas, traps, if you will, where people can be caught by enforcement measures. And so people who are going to be making applications have to get good advice and be aware of, what kind of background issues there may be, how to make the right application, how not to fall into the issue of misrepresentation.
Sure.
These are very big issues now.
So, yeah, Sterling, to follow up on what Gordon just said, for your listeners, here are a few key statistics. When I started in immigration law in 1995, Canada was deporting 6,800 people a year. Okay.
As undesirables,
well,
Alex?
People who committed some offense or were found inadmissible after being here for some reason.
Okay.
Failed refugee claimants, criminal charges, etc. 6,800 a year.
All right.
Okay. In 2008, that number was 12,700. Last year, in 2013, that number was 19,000. So the one budget that has constantly gone up over the last decade has been enforcement.
And I think what's been a change too is the mentality of the department. I think Gordon and I were talking about this the other day, that we used to felt that the department had more of a heart. So if there was a mistake, an innocent mistake made, a misrepresentation that perhaps was just an oversight,
right.
That was, forgiven. Oh, you stayed one day beyond, sorry,
right.
You didn't look at your passport, we'll let it go. I'm seeing that flexibility gone from the department, really, in the sense that, sorry, you didn't dot that I, you didn't cross that T, we're deporting you, or writing you up for misrepresentation, or we're denying your application.
Alex, you said 19,000 was the most recent number that you've heard. Why then does the number 35,000 keep going round and round in my head? Because that number is apparently some kind of mythical number of people unaccounted for by the government who should have been tossed, who have disappeared into society. Well, does that number resonate with you at all?
Well, let me explain what that number is. That number is an old myth that's been floating around now for years and years. These are people who have legitimate removal orders, and these removal orders, either deportation orders or exclusion orders or various types of removal orders.
Right.
And removal orders, for your listeners, is depending on the type of removal order you get, it's harder to come back to Canada, deportation orders being the most serious ones.
Right.
There are all of these removal orders that don't appear to have been enforced. Nobody can say, yes, we put this guy on a plane and we sent him home. Or we drove him to the border and that was the end of, we enforced that removal order.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean those people are floating around Canada. A lot of those people went home on their own. We don't have exit controls in Canada, and the vast majority of those people are very likely to have left. Yes, some of them are unaccounted for in the system in Canada, but if you see the numbers that I've talked about, that old 35, I'd be surprised if that number is still accurate.
And just to clarify what Alex means by exit controls, one of the biggest misunderstandings from my clients that call me is, well, they know I've overstayed. And I'm like, well, they don't know you've overstayed because we don't force you to fill out a form when you leave and file it saying, I'm leaving Canada at the airport. You don't do that. When you're leaving China, for example, you fill out a little paper saying, I'm leaving China, this is the date I left.
Right.
We don't do that in Canada. We don't do that in most free countries because
right.
we're a free country.
Yes.
You don't want to be here? Leave.
Right.
So there is actually no control or record of when you left, and most people don't realize that.
So this mythical the 35,000 number is made up, has been perpetrated and perpetuated by what? Angry Canadians who are upset with the immigration flaunting of the immigration rules, Gordon, that does occur from time to time?
It is people who are trying to find a number, to put a number with their anger.
Okay.
But, you know, you can easily control the number of people or keep a record of the number of people coming into Canada. If you don't have a control that shows you the number leaving, then there's always going to be that gap.
Right, sure.
I think the reality of the situation now, too, is that compared to 20 years ago, it is so much harder now to go underground in Canada. So much harder.
To just vanish into the throng.
You can't. Whether it's your driver's license, whether it's your access to health system, whether it's your social insurance number, whether it's tax, the computer system has linked all these numbers together. It is hard to get around without the government finding you somewhere.
And we'll also talk, we need to take a quick break here. When we come back, I want to talk, you've mentioned the whole matter of admissibility. Who gets into Canada and who decides who gets into Canada, and what's at play here with all of those decision-making processes. This is The Law Show on CISL 650. Our new guests joining us from Maynard Kischer Stojicevic are Gordon Maynard, Alex Stojicevic, and Rudy Kischer. And we're back with lots more right after this.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CISL 650.